My eyes burned as I stared at my father's text message, the glow of my phone illuminating the small pile of carefully wrapped Christmas presents on my bed. Those 5 words hit harder than any IED I'd encountered overseas. Christmas is better without you. The room seemed to tilt sideways. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling slightly, not from anger, but from the sudden hollow feeling expanding in my chest. 3 years of deployed holidays, of missed birthdays and graduations, of telling myself that family would be there when the service ended. All of it collapsed into this single digital rejection. Outside my apartment window, Christmas lights blinked cheerfully along the street. I typed back a single word. Understood. Military precise. Emotion-free. The soldier's response to an order, even one that shattered everything. My name is Olivia. I'm 31 and a former Army specialist. This is the story of how I discovered what family truly means when mine tried to erase me. I'd imagined this homecoming for years, the first Christmas without sand in my boots or the constant vigilance that had become my second skin. My duffel bag sat half-packed in the corner, containing small gifts I'd collected during my final tour. A hand-carved music box for Mom, vintage fishing lures for Dad, and custom onesies for my niece and nephew I'd never met. Grandpa Thomas had been my lifeline during deployment, sending me packages labeled, "For when the world feels too small," and handwritten letters that smelled like his pipe tobacco. They contained updates my parents never bothered to share. When I video called him last month from my new apartment, he'd insisted I come home for Christmas. "The family needs to see who you've become," he'd said, voice gravelly but firm, "and you need to remember who you were before all this." We'd talked about my struggles readjusting to civilian life, the job interviews where military experience translated poorly, the nightmares that still woke me at 3 a.m., the loneliness of a world that moved on without me. He was the only one who listened without offering empty solutions. Now I sat in silence, my father's rejection burning through every defense I'd built. No explanation, no discussion, just banishment, 5 days before Christmas. I didn't cry, I didn't call. I just canceled my flight reservation, unpacked my bags, and spent December 25th alone in my apartment with takeout Chinese food and the distant sound of neighbors celebrating through thin walls. 2 days after Christmas, I woke to the urgent buzzing of my phone against the nightstand. Squinting at the screen, I saw a string of missed calls. 5 from Mom, 2 from my sister Regina, 1 from my brother Kyle, 1 from Dad, and 1 from an unfamiliar local number with my hometown area code. The voicemails began with my mother's tearful plea. "Olivia, please, I just found out what your father said to you. We didn't mean it like that. We need to talk. Something's happened." Regina's message was colder. "You not showing up has complicated everything. You're not the only one hurting. Call us back." Kyle sounded panicked. "Liv, you need to call Mom. It's about Grandpa. He passed on the 24th. The will... You were supposed to be here." My hand froze on the phone. Grandpa Thomas, gone on Christmas Eve, and they hadn't told me. The final voicemail came from the unknown number. "Miss Reynolds, this is Veronica Jackson, estate attorney for the late Thomas Reynolds. Please contact our office immediately regarding the execution of his final will and testament. Time sensitive. Thank you." The realization hit me like physical pain. They hadn't bothered to inform me that the one person who had maintained contact during my service had died. The only family member who sent me care packages, who remembered my birthday, who asked questions about my life instead of offering platitudes about serving our country. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands shaking with grief and something colder, understanding. This wasn't about Christmas at all. 2 years ago, during my brief leave between deployments, Grandpa Thomas had walked with me around his property, 40 acres of prime land that had been in our family for generations. It included the Victorian farmhouse where my father grew up. We'd stopped by the pond where I'd learned to fish, and he'd grown unusually serious. "If anything happens to me," he'd said, "don't let them take what's yours. I've made sure you're not forgotten, even if they pretend you don't exist." I'd laughed it off then as an old man's paranoia. Now it seemed prophetic. I called the law office immediately. The attorney confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. I was named as the primary beneficiary of Grandpa Thomas's estate, his house, land, investments, and shares in the small regional brewery he'd helped found. Everything. But there was a condition. I had to attend the formal will reading in person on January 3rd. If I failed to appear, the estate would be contested, and everything would default to the next of kin, my father. Did Grandpa know about how they treated me? I asked the attorney. There was a pause on the line. Yes, that's why he changed the will 6 months ago. And that's why he insisted the will reading be recorded, to prevent them from pressuring you. The pieces clicked into place with military precision. My father's text wasn't about Christmas traditions or family harmony. It was about ensuring I wouldn't be present for the will reading. The sudden flood of messages wasn't concern for my well-being. It was panic over losing their expected windfall. I wasn't their daughter. I was an obstacle. I booked a flight that afternoon, not as the forgotten soldier seeking reconciliation, but as the heir they never wanted and the storm they never saw coming. The will reading was scheduled for 10 a.m. on January 3rd at Jackson Legal Services, an imposing brick building near the town square. I arrived in my hometown the evening before but stayed at a hotel on the outskirts. I didn't announce my presence. I didn't visit my childhood home. I didn't even drive past the cemetery. They had wanted my absence. I would give them exactly that until the moment it mattered most. At 9:59 a.m., I walked through the polished oak doors of the law office. I wore a pressed navy blazer, dark jeans, and the same boots that had carried me through 3 tours, still bearing the faint traces of foreign soil. My hair was pulled back in a tight bun, military precise. The receptionist nodded and directed me to the conference room. My entire family turned as one when I entered. Dad, red-eyed and rigid in his wrinkled suit. Mom, fingers white-knuckled around her purse. Regina, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock. Kyle, unable to meet my eyes. "You actually came," Regina said, breaking the silence. I took a seat directly across from them, placing a folder on the mahogany table. "Didn't want to disappoint Grandpa," I replied evenly. "He made it clear I needed to be here in person." Ms. Jackson entered precisely at 10 a.m., cutting off any further conversation. She placed a small recorder on the table and pressed play without preamble. Grandpa Thomas's voice filled the room, steady and clear despite his age. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. And if Olivia is in the room, thank you, kid. I knew you'd come." My mother's head bowed slightly. Kyle stared at the table. My father's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. I want to begin by saying this. Olivia was the only one who reached out to me consistently without being asked. She never demanded anything. She never came with expectations. She came with love and respect, and for that, she gets everything. The silence in the room was absolute. The house, the land, the brewery, shares, the investment accounts, all of it goes to Olivia Reynolds. Grandpa's voice paused, then added, "If anyone contests this will, they forfeit any auxiliary bequests entirely, so think real hard before you do something stupid." Regina exploded first. "This is ridiculous. You barely even spoke to him this past year." I turned to her, maintaining the calm I'd perfected under mortar fire. "And whose fault is that? You didn't even tell me he died. You had time for baby showers and engagement parties, but not one text about the man who supported me when Dad threw me away." My father's eyes narrowed. "You think just because you put on a uniform, you're better than the rest of us?" I leaned forward slightly. "Number, I think the fact that you told me not to come home for Christmas 5 days before Grandpa died says everything I need to know about who you really are." Mom's eyes brimmed with tears. "We didn't know what your father had said. He didn't tell us." "You didn't ask," I cut her off. "You never ask. You never call. I spent Christmas alone in my apartment while you all posted family photos online like I was already dead." Kyle finally spoke. "Olivia, this wasn't supposed to happen like this. We were going to talk to you after the holiday. Dad was just angry. I laughed, a sharp sound devoid of humor. "Angry. He told me Christmas was better without me, and you all went along with it. You don't get to rewrite history now that Grandpa left me something." Ms. Jackson cleared her throat. Unless there are legal objections, the paperwork will be processed this week. Olivia, we'll need your signature here. I signed without hesitation. When I stood, my family remained seated, as if paralyzed by the reality of what had just happened. The daughter they had cast aside was now the legal owner of everything they had coveted. I walked to the door, paused, and turned back. You didn't want me home. You got your wish, but now this isn't your home anymore. Outside, the January air hit my face like clarity. Sharp, clean, final. Over the next week, I met with financial advisors and property managers. Grandpa's investments were more substantial than anyone had realized. The brewery shares alone were worth enough to fund my business degree 3 times over. The house, my house now, was still occupied by my parents. They had 30 days to vacate. I had the property manager deliver the formal notice while I arranged my affairs in the city. There was no need for another confrontation. My father called once. I didn't answer. He left no message, just as he'd left no explanation for his Christmas rejection. Regina emailed, calling me selfish and vindictive. I forwarded her message to Ms. Jackson and blocked her number. Kyle called twice more, leaving apologetic voicemails that grew increasingly desperate as their move-out date approached. Kyle sent a lengthy apology text that I read but didn't respond to. We were wrong, it said. All of us. I should have stood up to Dad when he sent that message. I should have called you right away about Grandpa. I'm sorry. Mom appeared at the law office during my final signing appointment. She'd somehow learned I would be there from Ms. Jackson's secretary, who'd mentioned my scheduled visit when Mom called about retrieving personal items from the house. She didn't speak, just watched me from across the street. I walked past her without acknowledgement. For years, I'd made excuses for their silence, their favoritism, their absence. I blamed my military service, my independent nature, my failure to be the daughter they wanted. But that chapter is closed now. By February, they had vacated the property completely. The property manager confirmed they'd left the keys on the kitchen counter with a single envelope addressed to me. Inside was my childhood photo album and a note from my mother that simply read, "We failed you." I donated most of their abandoned furniture to veterans' housing and stored the family heirlooms in the attic. I have a home, not because it was given freely, but because the one person who recognized my worth ensured I had the last word. I returned home to rejection, but left with something more powerful than forgiveness, the certainty that family isn't defined by blood, but by who stands by you when the world turns its back. They shut the door on me at Christmas, so I locked them out permanently. 3 years later, I still haven't spoken to any of them, though Kyle occasionally sends cards that I never answer. The brewery shares have tripled in value, and I've turned the farmhouse into a retreat for veterans struggling with civilian transition. Grandpa Thomas would have approved.